Okay, folks, welcome back to Project 4th Gen Camaro. Today I'm going to be installing a set of long tube headers, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so these are the headers. I forget what brand they are because I bought them a long time ago, but they are stainless headers, and they do have provisions right here to keep your air system, and the bungs for the O2 sensor right there. So that's good because no check engine light. Also, it came with off-road Y-pipe that I'm going to put on, and haven't decided if I'm going to put a cat in there yet. Okay, so first things first, always disconnect your battery, especially when you're working around the starter, and I had to remove the starter anyway. On the passenger side here, it wasn't too difficult, even though it is tight. What I did was I took my accumulator off right here from my AC system, because I knew this car needs a compressor anyway, so there was nothing in the system, so I took that out of the way. If you don't take that out of the way, I couldn't imagine getting in there. But you got your EGR valve, the tube for your EGR valve right here, and then this piece of the air system, which is down here. I also took that off. Okay, those are 10mm bolts. Actually, all the bolts are 10mm bolts. And then I just started taking my bolts off. I took the spark plug wires off, which made my life a lot easier. The only one I couldn't get to up here was the back one and the rear bolt, and I did that from underneath, and that was not easy actually. Also, I had to remove a 15mm bolt for the engine oil dipstick, which was on the head, and I also took this bolt right here out of this coil pack. Where is it? Let me show you. This fucking bolt right here, because it kept stabbing me in the wrist. So I'm gonna go underneath and show you what it looks like down there. Okay, so this is what it looks like from down here. I had to pull my starter out, pull the plug off this low oil sender, and I had to take the dipstick tube out, which to get that out, what I did was I took a pair of channel locks, put it on the tube, and I leveraged it against the boss on the block just to pop it loose, and then I walked it out by hand because the O-ring gets stuck in there. It twists really easy, but it doesn't come up really easy. So with the manifold on, what I had to do was take this ratchet right here with this weird bend in it, and it, believe it or not, it contoured right to the floor like this, up in here. That's what I used to break that back bolt loose. And then to finish it off, I used this little 1/4-inch looking drive ratchet, but it accepts a 3/8 socket. And to get the spark plug boot off, I went in from the bottom of the manifold against the block here, and I was able to get it right there and pry at the boot, but it wasn't easy because it was stuck on the plug, so I had to try and twist it to pop it loose from the back side here. And that was probably the hardest part of this job so far. So just make sure you clean your gasket surfaces. And I'm using MLS gaskets. Where are they? Multi-layered steel. So they're supposed to be better than copper. So that's what I'm using. And that's what it comes with factory actually. They're reusable and they shouldn't burn out. Okay, so I had the header up in there and actually went in kind of easy. Had it all bolted up against the head, and it wouldn't go flush up against the head because one of the tubes was hitting the cross member right here. Okay, so what I had to do was I had to trim the subframe because I put the header back in and it was still tight against the subframe. It wasn't as tight as it was before, but I couldn't leave it like that. So there's my repair. What I did was I took my Sawzall and I just traced out where the header tube was, where I needed to cut with a Sharpie, and I sliced straight across there with the Sawzall. Be careful not to cut into the bolt on the top that holds the control arm in. And what I did was I took the piece right here that I cut out and transferred that onto a piece of 16 gauge sheet metal right there, and grinded it all up and welded it in there, and it should look something like that. Don't forget to weld the top. You're gonna have to weld upside down, blind probably. So that should get that header to fit, and then I'm gonna button this side up. So I actually had to trim
the pinch weld on the subframe also, as you can see right here, because the header tube was hitting there.
It went up in there pretty easy. The hardest part was holding the header and the gasket and starting the bolts by myself without another set of hands. But other than that, just put all your bolts in. Now's a good time to replace spark plugs and tighten your bolts working from the center out, and put your air tubes and your EGR back on with new gaskets, and you can call this side just about done. Throw your O2 sensor back in. Sensor wires longer, which I knew I was going to have to do, and I attached them like so to keep them out of the way of the exhaust. Drilled a hole in that little piece of plastic for the inspection on the starter, or inspection cover, or whatever you want to call that, and ran it up on that sensor there to right there. I also had to make the wires longer for this low oil sender, because I had to turn the little wire on the starter up and around to face the block, which shortened up this wire and it wouldn't reach, to keep everything away from the headers. And I might actually have to get some heat wrap, a couple wires in there. I might wrap some heat wrap around those, but they're all pretty clear. So I'm gonna finish putting this side together. I put the dipstick tube back in with a new O-ring on it and the starter, and this side is done. Okay, so I'm onto the driver's side of the car, and I'm gonna start underneath because it was real simple up top to get that manifold off. Real quick, by the way, I found out that these are Pro Tuning Lab headers. I looked them up, found the same design, so I'm pretty sure that that's the brand name of these headers. So up top, it was just the manifold bolts and the air tube, and I had plenty of room to get in there and get those out. What I had to do underneath to get the manifold down was there was a heat shield right there covering that hydraulic line. I just had to remove that with two 7mm bolts to get the flange to clear on the manifold to come down, and that came right out. So the header, on the other hand, when I went to slide it up in there, it was a little tight. But what I had to do was, there was a boss right here on the block that I had to cut off with my Sawzall. I used a long blade, grind down the subframe of the K-member right here with a grinder. And as you can see, this wasn't even a welded seam, but I am going to throw a bead of weld right across there, and then this header should go right in and bolt right up, much easier than the other side. I just had to give the header a little nudge to get it in, because it did hit the firewall right here, but I just gave it a little push and it fell right in. So other than that, I'm gonna have to make my oxygen sensor wires longer again, of course, and then nothing left but to fire this baby up with open headers and take it down the road. Hell yeah. So after another trial fit, as you can see, I gotta grind some more. And I'm gonna probably take off a little more up in there as well. I'm guessing these headers would have fit much nicer with a tubular K-member. Okay, so after much trial and error and fitting these headers up and down with the car, finally done. What I do like about them is they don't sit very low. They're tucked up against the car pretty tight, so hopefully they won't bottom out. And this is what I did for the other oxygen sensor, where I ran it, extended the wires, zip tied it to the trans right there, tucked it behind the oil filter. I don't know if it's going to stay up next to the block, and then I zip tied the other part of the harness to the lower part of the motor mount. So hopefully that stays. If not, I'm going to have to do something in that oil filter area to keep that wire out of the way. But that's complete, and it's New Year's Day 2020. We're gonna fire this bitch up open headers pretty soon.